Hello, my name is Christopher Ned. This is my oral presentation on Erik Erikson's 7-stage theories of psychosocial development. Here's a Pixar video I just decided to throw in here that basically explains the 7th stage. The next slide, we'll talk about the stage. Erikson's theories defines the stage of generativity versus stagnation as adults who are involved in investing in their work, families, communities, and future generations. They begin to look past their own lives to the well-being of those around them. Adults who are unable to do this never move past investing in themselves and are self-absorbed. They become stagnated and are unable to be productive for the sake of others. In counseling, I've seen several cases where I've come across older adults who seem to be trapped in their youth. They typically, wherever they went through some kind of trauma, they've stopped at that point. So I've seen people that are 50 that are acting as if they're 20s. They are just so self-absorbed. They've had children, families, and all kind of trouble within their life because they can't seem to get out of that specific stage. I've also seen other adults that are the same exact age that act totally opposite, where they've learned through their experiences, and now they are to the point where they want to give back and they want to invest in their work and their families, and they can give part of that knowledge that they've learned back into the community, and they can actually help another person. Those are the differences between the two. In this stage in my mother's life, you will see that she's experienced some trauma, and also how generativity versus stagnation is important in her experiences. My mother has experienced many traumas in her life, one being in an emotional and physically abusive marriage for 12 years. My mother was raised in a two-parent home. Her siblings were married, and they also had children within their marriages. My mother was not married when she became pregnant with me and my twin sister. Trying to give my sister and I a similar childhood as hers two-parent home, she married my former stepfather, not being completely aware of the monster he was capable of becoming. She now realizes the mistake she made and is looking forward to helping other women, whether they are single mothers or not, to be more self-aware, or to be more self-aware of the men they attract and are attracted to. The origin of generative concern is centered in the paradox of discovery of strength and the frontness of weakness. For years, my mother carried the shame of being an abused woman. Even years after she was divorced and remarried, as she has moved into adulthood, she sees her weakness as her strength. She is now ready to help younger generations of women to shed the shame associated with being in an abusive relationship. Growing up, my mom didn't speak much about her abuse. She hid it very well. She was a strong woman on the outside, and to her friends, she was always the charismatic woman. But deep down inside, she was not. She wasn't that woman. You know, in the house, you know, she did a lot of crying, a lot of shutting down, a lot of reclusive behaviors. I would almost think that she was bipolar sometimes in her emotions. It seemed like she would want to be abused to be happy. It was kind of a weird situation. So she was weak, and she found her strength in the actual in abuse of that man. She would become a stronger person once she was abused. And I think that today she sees that in women, how women go from being a victim to wanting and accepting being a victim, and they start to want those behaviors to feel normal. So she now helps women with that. So when she talks to women nowadays, she can actually tell them how good it felt, even though it felt terrible at the same time, and what to look out for, and also if they're dealing with the current situation, how to correct that train of thought. My mother was further pushed into generativity when she finally accepted responsibility for my sister's lack of a committed relationship at the age of 38. My sister has never had a boyfriend. Her absence of trust in men has made her build a wall around her heart. In the past, my mother thought my sister was too picky and looking for this perfect man that does not exist. Once my mother took responsibility for the violence we were exposed to, she was able to see that my sister did not have an unrealistic expectations. She was scared from her childhood. For a long time, my mom really thought that my sister just had this discord with men, and for a long time, I thought that my sister may be gay. I thought she was a lesbian for some years, but After years of shutting down, she finally opened up and said why she can't talk to men. She can't talk to men because the first man that raises his voice, she looks at him as the monster that my mom married. So for years, my mom would try to give my sister advice, but my sister just would not receive it. She would not listen to my mother because how could my mom tell her about a man being protective when she herself wasn't protected in her own relationship? My mother thought that everyone, her siblings, friends, husband, and my sister and I would share her excitement and congratulate her on her sense of well-being. Initially, everyone was not convinced that she was genuine. Although she is my mother, I must admit, my mother is quite selfish. About a year ago, prior to the conversation with my sister and I, and the continued conversation during my interview, both my mother and I would have agreed that she is self-centered. Rogers reports adults who are unable to invest in others never move past investing in themselves and are self-absorbed, hence her behavior. A year ago, this presentation would have focused on stagnation instead of generativity. My mom was completely absorbed in her world, in her own world. Much like people in the 12-step program, for some odd reason, when they find this newness, this new sense of self, they tend to be very excited, and I think that they want to share it with the world. But sometimes, even though you're getting counseled and even though you've moved past your addictions and she's moved past her abuse, she wanted to share that with us. But we were not on the same page because we did not have the same counseling. We did not share in my mom's exact experience. So we did not get to release that tension and release that those pent up feelings. So when she presented this to us, we actually took an adverse reaction and became angry. We later then, after we felt like she was sincere in how she was going to behave and how she would treat us, because she said she was bettering herself, we kind of let her heal, and we kind of took it easy on her versus the way we originally started. At the start of the interview process, my mother was still teetering between stagnation and generativity. She was still at the point of just talking about volunteering at a domestic shelter, but had not gone further than looking up shelters online. Our interview helped push her into action. In addition to my sister toying with the idea of moving into her own place, and moving to her own place. Elham and Ligon point out generativity derives from a desire to be needed. My mom will no longer feel needed if my sister moves out. She will now be faced with an empty nest, and in adulthood, this is pushing her from talk to action. So, due to my mom's abuse, she had relationship issues, and I think she was clinging to my sister because my sister was the only one that made her feel accepted in her wrongdoing and in her train of thought. So for years she didn't cling to her husband. My mom actually would cling to my sister, and as my sister aged and she wanted to become an adult, she wasn't allowed to do so, which stumped her growth because my mom was using her for comfort and she was using her to cope with her past. And after my sister wanted to move out and become her own woman, my mom was now faced with being alone in the house and also being alone with herself. So I think this kind of pushed her in the direction that she needed to be pushed in, because it allowed her to look in the mirror for once and not look at anybody else and see herself for herself. So I think it helped her in the long run. Erikson shows the stage you are currently in, that you are currently within the psychosocial development context where you may have gotten stuck in the past and where you were headed. Marcia and Jocelyn connect the research done by Erikson in the 7th stage in his theory as having the crisis of the crisis of the better someone is that caring for others more will be expected of them. There can be no effective care of others without the care of oneself. The opposite of this blocked generativity, not having anyone to take care of, this can be detrimental to an older adult. Roger defines crisis as psychological effort to adjust to the demands of the social environment. These are normal stressors that can be anticipated at each stage to help people develop. The psychosocial factors that inhibited my mother from being able to resolve the psychosocial crisis was her feeling like she was still the black sheep in her family. She was the only child in her family who had children before marriage. In the early 80s, this was Still taboo in many families. Not only did my mother have one child, she gave birth to twins. She was still stuck in the past and could not see where she was headed. My mother realized during an interview this is where her sense of selfishness came into play. She was going to prove her parents, specifically her father, wrong. My mother realized that she needed to let go of her past and start giving back to younger women who were currently in or trying to get out of an abusive relationship. Her prove everyone wrong attitude put her and her children in danger for many years. She can now see the error in her ways and wants to pay it forward. My mom, because she did not follow the typical standards of childbearing, where you had a mother and you had a father, like her mother and father, and like her siblings. She went the route of being a carefree person in the 80s. My mom dabbled in some things that she should not have, and it winded her in a split decision between multiple men. That was very odd in her time, especially coming from the family that she came from. So she spent many years saying, you know what, I'm going to get a kid I'm going to get a father for my children, just like my mother and father gave to me and my siblings. But in that rushed sense of thought, you can't rush somebody into being a good father. They just have to be that. You can't rush and try to find someone just to make up for something that you're lacking, because sometimes you'll get slipped people that are not meant for you. You won't be able to see it because you're just looking for that one particular set of skills. And she wasn't able to see the other bad or negative things that came along with that person. And this is how she wound up in an abusive relationship, because the guy that she dated was a teacher. He was educated. He had children of his own. So she assumed that this would be a good father for her children as well, but she did not stay around or sit long enough to let his true colors come out, or his bad behaviors to also come out. Coming from a family who was very big on striving to give back to the community, it was not hard for my mom to find ways to give back. She just had to move beyond her place of being stuck. Looking online for domestic violence shelters in her area enabled my mom to pursue their websites and also her dreams of helping others. While reading the website, she was able to read the stories of other women, children who reside in the shelters. Gaining the knowledge of women's stories and the need of personal items, clothing, and volunteers pushed my mother into an instant state of action. My mom has always had that want to help someone attitude. She just never knew how to help someone. She's always been the caring person that would get on the phone and she would help anybody, but she couldn't help herself. And that's where my mom actually will go wrong. But now that she's able to help herself and see her wrongdoing and fix herself, she's now diving into what she wanted to do finally and really making a dent into her goals. Since sharing her news of volunteering at a domestic violence shelter and her past experience with domestic violence on Facebook, my mom has been surprised at the response from her family and friends. She thought her friends would be very judgmental, since my mom presents herself as a very strong, independent woman, as spoke about in other slides. How could she allow herself to be trapped in an abusive marriage? What my mom found out was that many women are in abusive relationships. Not all abusive relationships are physical violence. Some are very verbal, and some are both. My mom found a community of women who, like her, became great pretenders, pretending they were okay. Their home life was not dysfunctional, and in fact, it was. Without the support of her church family, I'm not sure how long my mother would have unknowingly stayed stagnant. Opening up and being honest with herself and about her past helped my mother move into generativity. Roger writes, even if a particular task and crisis at a stage are learned or resolved, people will still move on to the next stage, but they will probably face problems due to the unresolved crisis experienced at earlier stages. My mother would have moved into the next stage of integrity versus despair. However, she would have brought those unresolved problems from stage 7 to stage 8, making it difficult to live the life of integrity into old age. When my mother became pregnant with my sister and I, she had to learn to adapt her thinking to new ideas. She had to adjust her schema, accommodation, and assimilation. My mother's initial schema was that she would have the support of her family and one day her future husband. She could never imagine she would be in an abusive marriage. Accommodations took place when my mom realized she would not have a dream marriage or a fairy tale life. She had to learn how to survive until she could break free. Once she was free, my mother had to then readjust her thoughts again, not to allow her embarrassment to overtake her. Assimilation took place when my mother received support of her family, friends, and church. The support from the church assisted my mother